Good evening, everyone. Okay. May I have your attention, please? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great pleasure to introduce this year's VMI Leader in Residence and our speaker for the evening, Ms. Tracy Walder. She worked as a staff operations officer in the Center Intelligence Agency, CIA, Counterterrorism Center before, during, and after September 11, 2001. And as a special agent at the FBI, during her time at the CIA, Tracy lived in and traveled to countries in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and as well as served in war zones and received many awards for her service, both in the CIA and from foreign intelligence offices as well. Among her awards were 4 Exceptional Performance Awards from the Director of the CIA, 2 Special Activity Awards, a Meritorious Unit Citation Award, a DCI Counterterrorism Center Medal, and 2 Operations Enduring Freedom Targeting Awards. After leaving CIA, Tracy became a special agent at the FBI's Los Angeles field office, specializing in Chinese counterintelligence operations, specifically the Thai and Chimak case, profiled on CNN and in New York. Following her time at the CIA and FBI, Tracy created 4 courses on national security and foreign policy for young women. Tracy now works as an adjunct professor of criminal justice and domestic terrorism at Texas Christian University. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tracy Walder.
Hello. Thank you so much, Cadet Diallo. I really appreciate that introduction. I also want to thank everyone in the Center for Leadership and Ethics, Colonel Gray, Colonel Looney, Dr. Tucker, Emily, Holly, all of you. This has been a pretty amazing opportunity. I do a lot of public speaking, but it never fails. I've spoken now, this is my 3rd time at VMI. I get tremendously nervous only at VMI. That's it. Exactly. And so part of the reason is that's how much respect I have for all of you. And it's not to say I don't have respect for the other audiences that I speak to, but that's the impression that all of you have left on me. And so really what I have seen over this past almost year, quite frankly, is pretty impressive, and all of you should be incredibly proud of the work that you do. Don't tell my students at TCU, but you far outpace them. So maybe not in football quite yet. I'm very proud of them. I'm so sorry, Cadet Shelton. But the one thing I wanted to talk about, and the one kind of leadership theme that I found during my time here, and really, the one thing I want all of you to remember is the idea that leadership, in my opinion, isn't static. The idea of being a leader shouldn't just be locked into these ideals that you have. You are constantly changing as a leader, and leadership is fluid. And I think a lot of times we can get caught up in this idea that these are the skills that I learned to be a leader, and there's really not necessarily wiggle room in terms of how I might be able to lead differently. Because the reality is, you grow up, right? You're a different person at 45 than you were, quite frankly, at 21 or 22 or however old some of you are. And if you feel that your leadership needs to remain static to exactly what you had before you departed here, that's going to be problematic in terms of your leadership style and how you develop as a leader. And so really, I think part of being an effective leader, and to go with sort of the theme this year, which is kind of courage of convictions, that is really what's changed the most in terms of my leadership journey. I had certain convictions when I graduated college, but then I had different ones when I left the CIA, and some new ones that I developed when I left the FBI, and some other ones that I developed as a teacher, and now some that I even have as a mom. And really, those all fold in to make me the non-static leader that I am. And so I wanted to sort of share my convictions with you and sort of give you some anecdotes in terms of how those developed, because here's the thing. You can't be a leader if you don't know what you stand for. And what you stand for is going to change as you grow up, and that's okay. However, you have to be open to embracing those changes. And so I'm going to even share one with you that I am currently working on, because even at my age, I still have convictions and things that I stand for that I'm working on and I want to incorporate into my leadership style. So the first one, I think you all know what a conviction is. Those are, your firm beliefs that sort of guide your style and give you the confidence to really grow and be a leader. So the first one that I wanted to talk about was actually strength. That's one of my key convictions, if that's okay with y'all. And so really, that was, I think, the first one that developed for me. For some of you that have read my book or know my story, I'm sorry, but I'm going to fold something in here. I was born with a developmental disability. It's called hypotonia. And so I didn't crawl until I was 3. I didn't walk until I was 4. All of those things are very late in terms of child development. But in the 70s, no one knew or really cared about them. Physical therapy was different. It didn't even exist, really, quite frankly. And so I didn't have a choice but to put one foot in front of the other, with literally my mom holding me up, because it was either that or I stayed in a wheelchair. And so, my parents sort of forced me to go to dance class. They forced me to go to gymnastics. They forced me to do things that they believed was going to increase my muscle tone, because really all it is exceptionally low muscle tone. They call it ragdoll syndrome or floppy baby syndrome. And so the doctors told my parents, she's gonna live. She'll be fine. Hypotonia can be fatal because it's a muscular disease. It can affect your heart, but it didn't affect mine. And they said, she's never going to be a dancer. She's never going to be an athlete. She's never going to have a physical job, but she's not going to die and she'll be okay. And I think my parents, I'm not sure they were okay with that. And then that made me not okay with that. And I think I developed physical strength, but also mental strength, because the thing is I tripped and fell all the time. I could be standing right here, and sometimes my ankles will just give out. It happens. But when you're in 3rd grade, it's embarrassing, right? And kids are mean. I don't know any other way to put it. And I was bullied horrifically from 3rd grade until 11th grade because of it. But I know this sounds strange. I turned that bullying into internal strength. I didn't necessarily see it as a failure on my part. I saw it as a failure on those kids' parts and society's part for not having that acceptance. And I think that gave me a lot of strength and tenacity, because what kid who was born with a developmental disability, who was told they may not walk, may walk, whatever, would then go and pursue a career at the CIA. And I minored in dance, everyone. I was on my college's dance team. And so those are all things that gave me mental strength. And I really think that that's one of the first kind of convictions that I have and still stays with me. Just because I develop it at one point doesn't mean it ever goes away. It might change. I think I added another one, though, and that was really at my time with the CIA and probably with the FBI, too. So I come from a long military line. My great-grandparents fought in World War I. My great-grandpas, fought in World War I, World War II. My dad and my uncle fought in Vietnam. So really all these generations have been in the military. And so I had an idea of what I thought loyalty was. I think I thought loyalty meant obedience. That's what I think I thought. But being at the CIA on September 11th teaches you a really different version of loyalty, to be completely honest with you. Because you have to understand, myself included, we got hauled in front of the 9/11 Commission. We got blamed for what happened on September 11th. But it never occurred to me that I had been disloyal to my country. So much so that I deployed to Afghanistan, and I continued to fight for that and to fight for my country. I'm not blindly loyal to my country, because I don't know that that's effective either, but I'm loyal. And it taught me loyalty in all aspects of my life, not just to my country, loyalty to friends, loyalty to colleagues. That's a skill that I really developed, and especially, working Chinese spies, at the CIA. I do think one of my most important convictions that I've developed is actually empathy. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to give you two anecdotes for that and how I developed that. The first kind of anecdote was actually talking to a terrorist. That really was empathy I didn't know I had, to be completely honest with you. I had an idea in my head of why I thought terrorists were terrorists. It was a bad idea. Let's put it that way. I had the opportunity when I was at Black Sites to speak with some terrorists. And, you do start to get to know them after a while, but getting to know them doesn't mean sympathizing with them, but you have to sort of build a relationship to get the information that you want from them. But the interesting thing is I was talking to one, I mostly dealt with the most senior level, but this was one who was a middle-ish level terrorist. And I asked him a very simple question, because quite honestly, I was curious. Like I think a lot of people were. I said, why did you join a terrorist organization? That's a simple question, right? That I think a lot of us wanted to know the answer to. And I thought, I know what he's gonna tell me. I've got this. But the interesting thing was, I was completely blown away by what he told me. And he said, well, I joined because they're my family. And I was like, well, can you explain that? Because I don't think I understand that. And it was really interesting. He was abandoned at the age of 8 by his entire family. He didn't have any schooling above that. He was living in a sewer drain in a country, and he had completely unchecked hepatitis. I think it would eventually have killed him. And a very senior ranking member of Al-Qaeda ran into him and said, hey, do you want to go to school? Do you want medicine? Do you want free food? Well, why would he say no? And that changed my entire perspective and helped me understand and try to empathize with why he became a terrorist, because the reality is that is part of how we fix the problem, is understanding those factors that push people into those organizations. And I was really proud of myself because a lot of the reporting that we did back ended up going up to the president at the time, which was Bush. And one of our recommendations was that we needed to provide more infrastructure support to fragile or failed states, because that's where this individual was from. They couldn't provide their basic needs of their people, this particular country. And I will say Bush put that plan into place because of our recommendation. And that country, that particular country, saw a tremendous drop in active terrorists. And so that really felt good to be a part of that, but to also not close myself off to what he had to say because I was really angry with him because of something that he did. I had to listen to him, which might feel gross at the time, but quite frankly, it was really helpful in driving policy decisions that made our nation safer, to be completely honest with you. The second one was, I was actually telling Colonel Gray a little bit of it. When I was in Afghanistan, we are not at a military base. We weren't at Bagram, but I got a fun idea that some special activities guys at CIA were testing out a new helicopter. These are the fun things that you do when you're bored in Afghanistan. So I got in the back of the helicopter, and we went to Bagram because we were going on what we called a food run. That's where we got a lot of our food from that we brought back with us to where we are. And I went on the food run with them. I was so excited to get out of our compound, and woohoo. So the interesting thing was, we were kind of taking a tour of Bagram because I hadn't even been there. I had been in the country for a while, but I hadn't been to Bagram, so why not take a look around? And we were in the medical tents. I'm not sure if it evolved into actual buildings, but it was tents at the time. And a bomb went off, like right outside. The tent was kind of on the outskirts of the facility, and a massive bomb went off. It killed a lot of people. But I wore hard armor, not soft armor. I was in Afghanistan. It's heavy, if any of y'all have worn it before. I'm not, the biggest human in the world. And it was really interesting because the doctor who was there was a great guy. Because of the body armor and because of him throwing himself on top of me because he was trying to be polite and I guess make sure it fractured my pelvis. And as a result, at a very young age, I realized I couldn't have children. And so it was really interesting, though, because I was obviously concerned and worried about myself, but they put me on a bed in sort of their triage room, and they put me in the bed next to clearly a woman who had been the victim of this bombing. And one of the things I realized, she was wearing a full burqa. It was like that bluish color that you see, and she was, I would say, burned over 100%, of her body. And she was basically put there to die. They were going to make her comfortable, and she was right next to me. And there was so much animosity between Americans and Afghans at the time. But when I turned around and looked at her, really all I'm seeing are the whites of her eyes. It's very difficult to see her. I realized we're not any different. She's a woman, I'm a woman, she's dying, I'm hurt. And I think that also helped sort of foster a sense of empathy, I guess, in me. That it's not that I didn't have any, but it was a different sense of empathy. So the next one I want to talk about is one that I feel is very important, and that's integrity. I would say that is a huge thing for me. That's a huge thing for my family. It always has been. But sometimes integrity is also about knowing when to leave. And so I have a favorite quote about that. A man who wants to lead an orchestra must turn their back on a crowd. And that is really important to me. And I did the thing that a lot of people thought I shouldn't do. I left the CIA. I became an FBI agent, right? Really cool job, hard to get. I wasn't enjoying myself. I was the victim of a lot of sexual harassment there and didn't have the best time because of it. I had brushed a lot of it off. Quantico was not a fun experience for me because of the harassment I endured. But I think kind of contrary to the whole strength thing, in line with the whole strength thing, I stayed because I knew, Quantico was a finite period of time, right? It wasn't something that was going to go on indefinitely. 17 weeks, just count it down on a calendar, feels good to X those off, and then we'll move along with our lives, and things will get better. And that was sort of my attitude. They did not get better. They got exponentially worse. Now, again, when I say this, I don't want you to think I'm speaking about the FBI as a whole. There are some incredible agents that I am very good friends with. I just can only speak from my lived experience. And so a lot of people had said to me, not that we're at the FBI, but a lot of people said to me, Tracy, this is such a cool job. Why would you leave it? You should stick it out. You should be the change for other women. But sometimes being the change isn't staying in the bad position. Sometimes you can be the change in a different position and leave with your integrity intact. And I had went out to dinner. I would do these kind of weekly dinners with my dad. And I told him what had happened, a specific comment that was made to me by my supervisor that day. My dad is 6'5", ex-military, played football with OJ, he's he's a man of few words, let's just put it that way. To say that he was upset would be an understatement. And it was my dad who actually encouraged me to leave, who actually said, you know what, this is not okay. You're losing your sense of integrity. And by staying, you're not doing anything to develop that. In fact, you're chipping away at it by staying. And so I made a really hard decision to leave, which is crazy, right? You know, this great job, but I made that decision to leave. And that brings me to one of my final convictions, which is change. And so I realized, you know, a lot of times we try to change agencies from within, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I realized, let's try to change it a different way. And so I actually went to college to be a high school history teacher, not work at the CIA, which is strange, I know. But I used that and the money I had saved at the FBI to get my master's in education. And I got my master's, I started teaching, but I started realizing that when I moved to Dallas, I taught at a very elite all-girls private school, and these girls had a lot of questions. They had a lot of questions about the job that I had, or the jobs that I had, and it was distracting from class, quite frankly, because we'd go off on all these tangents, and so I thought, well, you know what? Let's create one. Let's create a class. And I started realizing I didn't have a lot of examples of females in these careers growing up. So maybe if we expose them to these careers, maybe they'll want to do them. I don't know. I certainly wasn't going to force them to do it. And so it became the most taken class at the school. And over 150 of my students have gone into careers in the military, national security, foreign policy, or law enforcement. And I'm super, super proud of that. And I started to realize, well, maybe one way I can change this discrimination that I faced was actually changing it from the ground up rather than the top down. And that became a super, super important part of who I was. And so can I share with you the one that I'm working on? Would that be okay? It's a big one. It's forgiveness. I'm not good at it at all. So maybe some of y'all could teach me. I think some of you agree. And I'm gonna share the story here. This is the first time I've publicly shared this story. Colonel Gray knows. And so it's interesting because I've done all these crazy things, right? You know, I've almost died in Afghanistan and served in Africa and all this cool stuff, right? You tracked down domestic terrorists and went to neo-Nazi conventions at the FBI. But this is the most difficult one. So obviously, you know, I left the FBI to become a teacher, and I really found sort of my passion and my stride. That was a big thing to do, right? And I loved that all-girls school that I was at. Loved it tremendously. I still am in contact. In fact, I've been, a lot of them are at WNL right next door, and so I've been meeting with them during my off time here. And August 2020 was August 1st, 2020, was a big day for our family. And that was the day that my daughter's teacher was arrested on 5 counts of child pornography charges. Yeah. That was a big day. He had broken her arm in 3 places and locked her in a closet. Yeah. And I reported it each time to the school and to CPS, and they didn't fire him. And he was let out of school in handcuffs. And so I quit that day, and I pulled my daughter out. It's really hard to forgive them and to forgive him. And it's sort of, it's a really interesting thing. I've never been in a position before where I've had to forgive like that, right, and let go. I mean, he's been sentenced. He's in prison now 27 years. I mean, great. All of that's done. But it's really hard we'll never let go of it, right? It's part of who our family is now. But I have to forgive in order to be able to move on. And that's been really difficult for me because teaching was sort of this dream that I thought I was going to do, especially at the high school and to young girls. I kind of thought I had my thing going. But because of the integrity and the strength and all of those things that I had before, I had the courage to leave right on the spot when all of that happened, which I don't think I would have had. I don't know if I would have. But I still haven't found a way to forgive. And so that's something that I'm working on. And quite frankly, once I get it, I think it's going to make me a better leader. And so that's my whole point, is we can't go into our leadership in this static way and thinking, these are my convictions, these are what they're always going to be, I'm never going to differentiate from them, and I'm never going to be open to these other opportunities that shape who I am and what I stand for. And so I just want you to remember, some of you are on like the cusp of graduation. Was it 3 more weekends? Not that you're counting. Some of you are on the cusp of graduation, and so I want you to realize that leadership is not kind of this straight road. It's a windy, windy, windy road, and it's going to take lots of twists and turns. But you can't be a good leader if you don't develop these convictions along the way that really navigate those windy roads and help you be an effective leader. So with that, can I take questions? Would that be okay? Maybe there's not, and that's okay too. I've scared you all. Oh, and I'd also like to thank Catherine and Kim, too. I didn't see you here. Hi.
Well, I was posting about this evening on social media and happened to see some wonderful breaking news about a future role of yours.
Oh.
Would you be so kind as to share it with our audience?
Oh, yeah, sure. I forgot about that. So I am the national security and crime contributor for News Nation, which is a newer news station, and I am excited about that. It's not in the classroom per se, but right now there's no former female CIA officers that are contributing on the news. And I think sometimes it's really important in a superficial way to just see it. And so I'm proud of that. Thanks. Right here.
Good evening, ma'am.
Hello.
My question for you is, at what point in your career were you challenged the most as a leader?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think through that. Sorry, just give me a moment. Honestly, probably most recently when I left this school. You know, I was Teacher of the Year every single year that I was there, and I was an assistant dean of students, and I was helping lead the school. And I think in a way, I felt like I was letting my students down because I left, per se. But the interesting thing is now, you know, I'm a little more comfortable talking about it, and I talk about it with them, and they feel comfortable talking to me, and they all say, that was such a good example that you set. You drew a line in the sand of what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior. And so it was challenging in that moment, obviously, to do that. I'm not going to say it was easy, but now I've realized it's clearly had an impact in terms of the young ladies around me that were watching me and were watching my actions. And so I think it was challenging, but also rewarding at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Nothing else? Okay, well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and I look forward to great things from all of you. You all better change the world. I'm going to be very upset.
Ma'am, on behalf of the VMI superintendent, the entire Corps of Cadets, we want to thank you for your genuine sharing of your story and for sharing your heart this evening. Just once again, a round of applause for Ms. Tracy Walder.